See you in a bit.
Sounds good.
I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. And on our Filmmaker U YouTube channel, you can make sure to hit the subscribe button and check the notification bell to get our weekly videos. Every week I interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. For more information on how they can assist you in your filmmaking needs, go to owcdigital.com. And this week I'm joined by filmmaker Todd Miller, who to discuss his films, Apollo 11 and Dinosaur 13. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks for having me.
I guess the first thing, maybe we should jump in with what we were talking about before we went live here, and that is, like when I was working on a project years ago, and they, we contacted NASA for footage, and they all came on these old digi beta tapes, and some were regular beta, and it's so important to archive and protect these materials. What was it like? What was the material like that you were getting from NASA for Apollo 11?
Well, prior to Apollo 11, we actually did a short film about Apollo 17 called The Last Steps. And that was predominantly all shot on film outside of some of the news archival that we utilized, or that we had access to, and that stuff was in pretty good shape, but the film itself wasn't. So we went back to the original negative, had it transferred, and I wasn't really happy with the results of that. So when it came time to do Apollo 11, the stars really aligned, pun intended. I was working with a post-production facility that had developed a new technology, a film scanner, that no one else had. And it was able to do the work almost 4 times faster than any other scanner on the market, and the quality was stunning. So we were able to go back to the National Archives, which is the end repository for all of government documents, film footage, videotape, everything. It all kind of gets funneled there eventually. Mm-hmm. We did have to work with NASA and some other facilities, but for the most part, everything came through the National Archives. And we just asked for everything. And I was, I can't say I was stunned. It's just, how technology works. There hadn't been a real mass scanning effort for any of those materials, and this was 35 millimeter that was shot, or 16 millimeter, or even 8 millimeter. Maybe there were some home videos from the launch that they had. None of that had really been scanned since about 2008-ish. So we started on Apollo 11 in 2016. So there was, almost a decade gap there of technological advancement with film scanners. So we pitched the National Archives and NASA that we thought, in the tests that we conducted, and we had they sent us a couple reels and we could test them, that we could actually future-proof, this footage, and no one would ever have to go back to that negative. You hear that all the time, but we truly think that, at least for the 16 millimeter and the 35, and even eventually the large format that came in a couple months into the research of trying to gather everything, that there really won't be a reason to go back to any of that. So fingers crossed, if we did our job correctly, that future filmmakers will be able to utilize that repository as an asset to make films in the future.
Now, what kind of, did you have to do restoration to any of the content or any cleanup? Yeah,
so it was really, we had, our deliverables list was enormous. So we not only had, when we first went into it, we went with the understanding we were going to have a theatrical theatrically exhibited film. And I felt pretty confident we could get into Sundance, just because my last film had been there, and I thought, it was, the timing was kind of right. We were finishing the film up at the tail end of 2018, so I knew it needed to play on a big screen and in a theater. So we did the theatrical version, and that was taken from the original raw scans that we did. So, and all the scanner is, it's like having, a film camera or a digital camera, just, shooting that film. It's like going out and shooting. So here you are with a pile of raw materials. And we also scanned all the raw files are, were basically captured in log. So, there's a lot of still, shadow detail that can be brought out depending on what filmmaker wants to pick up, with it in the future. When we worked off of those raw files, and for the most part, we kind of found that 8K to 16K was kind of the sweet spot for most of the stuff. We worked entirely in 8K when we did our color correct, our restoration work, the conform, all the dust busting that needs to take place. And there was a lot, anytime you're scanning, just like if you're going out and shooting, there's variables that end up, there's dust, there's particles, maybe hair gets in there. So we had to clean up all of that stuff because a lot of the reels were 50+ years. There was a lot of, work that needed to be done. And then we had an IMAX release as well. So for the IMAX release, we had to do a DMR, their digital media remastering. Lee Weimer, who's the colorist there, works on a ton of the superhero films, handled that, and she just did an amazing job. And it's kind of like going back to the drawing board. So IMAX is its own thing. And there's two different flavors of IMAX. So we had the 4K laser, and then we had the Xenon version as well.
Yeah.
And then we had a broadcast deliverables too. So CNN Films was our broadcaster in the US. So we had that. And then we had an international, release too. And then on top of that, we did an HDR of the entire film, where we went again back to the raw scans and created a whole new restoration project on that. And then Universal got the international rights for television, and every country is different. So I'm sure, as the filmmakers out there can appreciate, you're constantly having to deliver things in different flavors for all that. But for all intents and purposes, all of the raw data, that huge data set that we did, which wasn't just the film, but it was the audio, which ended up being about 2 petabytes of data. For any deliverable that we did, we went back to the original source and then would conform, do our restoration work, and final delivery.
2 petabytes. That's a lot.
I didn't even know what a petabyte was when they told me.
Now we got 2 messages here for you. One from people watching. Johan wants to say it's nice to listen to you, Todd. Steven Slater sent him here.
Oh, Steven, yes. Steven was our archive producer, by the way, on not only Apollo 11, but on our short film. He is, no one knows the NASA archives like Steven. Hi, Steven.
And then Russ wants some clarification. Was it the National Archives in College Park?
Correct. So, they have a spider web of, their network, all over the country. But yes, they call it Archives 2. There's 2 archive buildings in Washington, D.C. Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, was where, for the majority of that 50 years, is where the 65 millimeter footage of all this Apollo 11 stuff that we used in the film was.
Now, you mentioned your other film, Dinosaur 13, had gone to Sundance. How, it's so different from Apollo 11. You have interviews in it, I guess you could say. So why did you make the choice for Apollo 11 not to do interviews?
Well, it really just had to do with the story. What's the best, what's the best tool in our toolbox to tell, the story. With Dinosaur 13, which tells the story of some paleontologists that got in hot water over the largest T-Rex find. in history. And that was, I had read a book about the whole story, written by the paleontologist Peter Larson. And after spending some time with them, we went and interviewed everyone with the idea that we were going to go back and actually do it as a docudrama. So we were going to go recreate everything and shoot it all. And then what happened is they started turning over archive to us, and they had documented, because they're scientists, they had documented everything. So we started looking at it, and it really hadn't been cataloged. No one had really gone through and really tried to put it on a timeline. So, I kind of put on my editor hat while we were shooting over the years with that project. And anytime anybody gave me something, stick it in the timeline, see where it, lined up with everything else. And that was a wonderful way to work. And it changed creatively the entire, initially what we set out to do. And it was a great lesson to be open to, where, just kind of following the ball of creativity and trying to tell the best story possible. So when Apollo 11 came out, so for Dinosaur 13, yes, we ended up interviewing everyone and using archival. And it was only because the people that we were interviewing were such characters. Here's these dinosaur diggers in the middle of the Hell Creek Formation out in South Dakota, and they were two brothers, and then you had basically the female version of Indiana Jones with Susan Hendrickson that found this dinosaur, and the whole legal yarn that they kind of got wound up in. I mean, even the attorneys were characters, so you couldn't even cast them. Daniel Day-Lewis couldn't play any of these people, so it just made sense to keep them on screen, and then to utilize them. Use the archive, and it was a good lesson for me as a filmmaker to use as much as the real people as humanly possible, because my career at that time was kind of shifting more into narrative fiction. So when Apollo 11 came about, I've always been a big fan of these large format films that were made in the 50s and 60s, these proto IMAX films that were made. And I just always saw that as, let's just go on a journey. Let's get as close to, an experience as humanly possible. And the best way to do that would to be that, take the audience on this collective journey along with these astronauts and the people that were in the rooms that made the mission happen, and just keep it simple. And don't have any, modern interviews, don't have any, reflective comments. Walter Cronkite can do that in real time if we need it. But I thought that would be an interesting thing to sit in a dark room and watch in a theater. So that's why we did that. And kind of the primer for that was our short film, Apollo 17, which was, we had a 30-minute cut at one point of that. And I thought if we could sustain, 30 minutes, I could have easily stretched that out to a feature-length film. And so Apollo 11 became that stand-in for that.
Now, Russ is following up. He wants to know, what was the company that scanned the raw footage?
Final Frame. So Final Frame here in New York, Will Cox, who owns a company, he's also a colorist. He was my colorist on Dinosaur 13 and Apollo 11, even everything I've ever worked on professionally, Will has been the colorist. So again, it was really happenstance. He just called me up, we're friends, and he said one day, hey, I'm getting into the film scanning business, so if you ever have a project that needs some film scan, I said, oh, do I have a project for you? But now I'm so proud of him and that company. They've just exploded. They have a Los Angeles office now. They have a London office. They did the rushes on the new James Bond film, some other IMAX films that were shot on film. They're also scanning and probably most importantly, restoring and part of the curation process of film that's been locked in vaults, just like a lot of the Apollo 11 stuff was. So it's important work that needs to get done, and Will and his team are on the front lines. I should add, the scanner we utilize, it was a prototype scanner that they built custom There was a hardware guy and a software guy from the UK. And they were over here in New York and built it, you know, for our project. But now it was capable of doing 16K. The new one's capable of doing 23K. So, you know, a lot of that, there's some diminishing returns with, you know, going that high, and of course, but I think for, you know, some large format films, it seems like there is some data still to be pulled from the emulsions.
Wow. Now, one of the things that intrigues me with Apollo 11 is, so, you know, with Dinosaur 13, I'd never heard that story about Sue the T-Rex and the whole adventure. But Apollo 11, everyone's heard the story in the sense of, we all know, you know, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, what have you. So was there a worry in the edit suite that like how did you keep it so engaging and intense for us, the viewers?
Well, I think it just, you know, we like to make films that, you know, that excite us. You know, I went and sat in every single time we had a screening. You know, I'm not one of those directors that will go and, you know, just show up for the Q&A. I like to experience it with the audience. And I never got bored. I knew how lucky I was to be able to have a theatrically released film. I'm always, you know, pinching myself when I'm in the theater and I could see my own work. And, you know, you really spend so much time on these sequences. We're a big believer of testing. So, you know, take the launch sequence, for instance, in Apollo 11. You know, we test that with an audience. The audience is us, you know, and the filmmakers. Or in the case of Apollo 11, you know, we would go down, our good friends, Arth Barish, who runs the theaters down at Smithsonian, the National Air and Space in DC. We got to invite the astronauts and their families and sit in the theater and, you know, show them some scenes. And we could tell if they got excited about it because they see everything and have to go to all of this, you know, Apollo, you know, space stuff. They've just been inundated with it for 50 years. We knew if they would get excited about it, then we had something. I'll never forget the first time. It was right before Sundance, and we premiere, and we showed it to Buzz Aldrin here in New York on a big screen at Final Frames screening room, and it's a wonderful facility. And he, at first, I thought I was in the back, just nervous. He sat way in the front, and I thought he was sleeping. But I kind of went over and just took a glance, and you know, he was just glued, riveted, and right away he wanted to, because they're, you know, they're scientists too, and engineers, and not just astronauts and pilots and war heroes, but he wanted to, you know, kind of make it better. So we were pinging him for questions. You know, did this look right? Did that look right? We got to like tweak some things. So it was a wonderful way to work. But I guess to answer the question, if it gets us excited, then, you know we got something. And with the mission to the moon, each one of them, every single thing that they did, they were risking their lives. I mean, imagine, you know, every single maneuver that they were doing. Anytime you're docking and undocking a spacecraft in space while traveling, you know, tens of thousands of miles per hour. You're firing off, you know, pyro in the middle of the vacuum of space. You know, it's risky business. So I think, you know, from a filmmaking standpoint, it was very easy to inject, you know, through trial and error and sound design and music, you know, how critical that was, and kind of that tension, and then the release of that tension in the film.
Are you excited for all the talk about Mars and returning to the moon?
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, I wish I could get a ticket. That would be.
I know. Fun. I was saying the same thing. Like you heard for Richard Branson's trip to the edge of space recently.
Yeah.
Some millionaire who spent $28 million to be on the plane, and then he was too busy.
Like, is that right? Oh, I didn't hear that.
It made me so frustrated. I'm like, you could have donated it to one of us. We all would have.
This is the era that we live in. I like to think we like slipped into some multiverse, and you know, maybe we'll pop out of it. But it is exciting to see these guys. You know, there's always pros and cons with you know, billionaires doing, you know, whatever with their money. But As far as I'm concerned, exploration is a needed thing, in society and humans. And I can't wait I hope I'm around, for when we actually do land on Mars. It'll happen eventually.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the delay in the feed. We do have a quick question about the scanning technology from John. He wants to know, is the scanned footage you guys did available for other filmmakers to use? And what's the process for accessing it? Is it in the archives now, or what's that process?
Yeah, so the pandemic just put a major monkey wrench into our plans. So everything that we have, all those 2 petabytes, yes, is back in the public domain. That was always the plan, that we would do that in the interest of future filmmakers and others to utilize, whether it's research, what have you. So you can contact the National Archives, they or even NASA. I know just because I talked to those guys how inundated they are. So I don't know what the status is, but if you can imagine, you're a researcher, and the National Archives have been closed during the pandemic. They're just now getting, I believe, all of our materials. I should have checked that before we did this interview, because I seriously don't know what the status is.
Yeah.
But it definitely will happen, if it hasn't already, sooner rather than later. But they still have to organize all of that data. They have to get all of their local identifiers, and then they also have to curate it, get I'm sure whatever front-facing website application they have to do. I would say that there's some really good researchers too. And if you mentioned Steven Slater, Steven's still on. I contacted Steven very early into the space films that we've done lately, and I'll just sing his praises. There's no better archive producer, researcher on the planet, particularly for space-driven material. Him, along with a colleague of ours named Ben Feist, were just instrumental in making these films, and also are continuing to make films. They just did, for Apollo 11, Ben actually was hired by NASA to do data aggregation for Mars trips and whatever else they're doing. But he also created, if you want to watch Apollo 11 in real time, the entire 8-9 day mission, go to Ben's website, Apollo 11 in real time, and you could see not only all the footage, but the stills. Everyone at Mission Control, you can on off their audio headset mics, hear everything they're doing. And they just did one for Apollo 13, which is incredible. So I hope they get done with all the other ones, because they're fantastic websites and really great resource.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one of the things I noticed, you've edited all your projects. Now, you also won the Eddie, I believe, for documentary. I have to say, there's some phenomenal edits in that. There's particularly, I think, just as where there's a push up on one of the facilities, and all of a sudden we're inside, and somehow you found 2 cameras that were somewhat the same. It's very impressive. So, how do you make sure you keep, I guess, an open mind, or make sure that you aren't biased because you're so involved in the footage? Do you have other editors come in, or how do you like to approach that?
Well, with Apollo 11, what was a really great resource again was Steven's an editor too, Slater. So he had taken all the 16 millimeter, which was shot in MOS, and taken all of the audio that Ben had done, which was this 10,000 hours, 10,000 plus hours of audio. Ben had sunk it all up, gave it to Steven and myself, and then we were able, Steven did 99.9% of it, to sync up all that 16 millimeter. So if you can imagine, there was 2 cameras in Mission Control, each 2 camera operators, they each had 2 cameras depending on the day. There was some large format footage that was shot in there too. But Steven would go and sync all that with this Mission Control audio, which was astounding. And it was painstaking work. I mean, it took years to do, but that gave me, first of all, it took the burden off of me because I didn't have to do it. So in that sense, it was, he was acting as an assistant editor with that regard, but it also allowed me to kind of stay focused on the narrative and the story, and what we needed to do. But there was a lot of hard decisions in the film. What hit the cutting room floor. I mean, there truly is an 8-day, edit in there. I mean, that's what, if you were to look at our sequences, each sequence was a day. So we would, in 24 hours. So you could let, they never went to sleep. So Mission Controls, was working in shifts. So the green team would replace the white team, replace the black team, replace the maroon team. So you just kind of try to figure out exactly who's talking when, see if they were on camera. You got to know everyone and all those shifts. By the end of the mission, of course, it was like a rainbow instead of those, those color coded teams. They were all kind of mixed in and just trying to pull through to finish everything. But so Stephen and Ben's work was a big help to me as an editor, so I can really focus on the creative, aspects of trying to tell the best story.
Now I have another question from Johan. He says, thanks for the shout out for Apollo in real time. He's a co-researcher and historian with the project with Ben and Slate. And Russ wants to know what system did you edit on?
Premiere.
Okay.
Yep.
Now I have one last question to ask you. We've been in this pandemic for quite a while, and some people are still stuck at home. A lot of us are sort of watching streaming services. Is there a show or movie you discovered during the pandemic that people should check out on their streaming service?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm always a fan of directors that take on, if it's a series, like we'll do the whole bulk of the series. So what Barry Jenkins just did with the Underground Railroad is just like unbelievable. And it's, the subject matter is so tough to watch. But the performances are amazing. The music, the production design, the cinematography, the sound design too. And I should mention in Apollo 11, Eric Milano, my longtime sound mixer and sound designer, is just incredible, and Brian Eimer, our IMAX mixer. And that's an integral part of my editing too. Is let's dig into the sound design. So Underground Railroad. I'm a huge Gaspar Noé fan, so I actually went back and rewatched Enter the Void. I actually watched it a couple times during the pandemic. Irreversible. He edits his own films too. He's kind of all in, when it comes to film. So I highly recommend that. Bong Joon-ho, who just won for the Oscar for Parasite. I got very fortunate to be able to hang out with him and his team. You mentioned the Eddie, the ACE Award. Parasite won for that. Oh God, I'm blanking on the Yang Jimo won for Parasite. So I went back and watched films he had edited. Look him up. He's phenomenal. And then I went back and watched a bunch of kind of the older Bong Joon-ho stuff, pre like Memories of Murder. And then one I've really been studying a lot, which was a Kan Ichikawa film called Tokyo Olympiad. If anybody's seen that or a fan, it's from 1965. It's about the Tokyo Olympics in '64. Highly recommended. It's one of the best sports documentaries of all time. And then I also just recently, I mean, I could be on here for hours talking about this, but I'll just mention one more because I think it's kind of as far as the production goes, it's like should be the gold standard, and it's so underrated. Is Steven Soderbergh's The Knick that he did for, I think it was on Cinemax. There was only 2 seasons, and what's really fascinating about it, here's a period piece about the Gilded Age, a hospital, particularly a doctor played by Clive Owen in New York City. And the production design's incredible. The acting's incredible. Clint Mansell did an amazing score, but Soderbergh, as he does, shot it, directed it, and edited it. The entire thing, all however many episodes over 2 seasons. And it just, you would never know that it wasn't made by a gazillion people. But what really makes that series special is the production notes came out, like the emails back and forth with Soderbergh and some of the studio execs. And it's really a fascinating look into a peek behind the curtain on how that world functions. So if people are interested to know, like, what does a studio executive do? Well, they're going to tell Steven Soderbergh what to do, sometimes, and he's going to tell them back why he thinks they're wrong. So for that, I really highly recommend that series.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for letting us interview. And that's our show this week, guys. Make sure to check out Filmmaker U at filmmakeru.com. And of course, follow us on social media at filmmaker_U on Twitter and the Filmmaker U channel on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, owcdigital.com. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaker needs. And again, thank you so much, Todd, for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good weekend.